The magic you're looking for is in the work you're avoiding.
Yeah, I think that's true for all of us. And related to the industry, the work I do with coaching, one of the first things I talk to the business owner about, or the senior leader in the organization, where their passion is and what they're focused on, and then what they're avoiding, and that's often the deficit of the business, right? To the detriment of all other components of the business. And I think the cool thing is that once you identify that and know what's wrong, then you flip it to a who problem, right? Rather than saying, what do I need to do? Now I know what I need to do and what I'm avoiding, and who's the best person to do this? And ironically, in our industry, I think it's kind of unique that some of the problems that people are trying to solve, like, storytelling through social media, they've got 5 people in the business that are untapped, that are really good at that. They're great storytellers. They're natural with a camera and, all of that. And you can kind of source it internally. It's not always the case, of course, but it's there. But I think the first thing is just admitting, like, here's what I hate and here's how I frame it, and push it into the corner. And it's that to-do tomorrow list. Once we flesh that out, we're further ahead.
Yeah, I think certainly from my personal experience, there is this habit that a lot of humans, I think, have, certainly I do, of the biggest job being kind of pushed to the back. And you end up creating almost friction along the trajectory to get to that job. Like, I sometimes find that on a day where I know I've got a big task to complete, I'll just continuously place smaller tasks in front of it and push it to the back of the flow. And I find myself doing like fairly insignificant jobs that really don't amount to much, just in order to, stop myself from getting to this big, perhaps slightly overwhelming job that needs to be taken care of. There's a great book, isn't there? You must have read it, Eat That Frog.
Yeah, Brian Tracy.
Yeah, Brian Tracy, which is all about doing the most important thing first thing in the morning, right? That's why it's called Eat the Frog. You got to get on and eat the frog, right?
Well, now you've gone and spoiled 300 pages into one sentence, but that's what the whole book's about.
It's actually a really short book, though.
Yeah,
right?
that's
You can
right.
read it in a day.
That's right.
And it's fantastic. It's one of these ones that sold like 10 million copies or something crazy.
Yeah, because it is so simple. And, if it's not your frog to eat, again, it's finding out whose frog it is to eat and getting it done.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is looking at the organization like a long pipe, and wherever it's pinched, it doesn't matter how good we are at other things. You can only get so much flow through that pipe if you don't unclog it or reset it. I think that's a great book to look to.
Yeah. And it's I often wake up in the morning now and I think to myself, let's just get on and eat that frog, get that task out of the way. And then it's amazing how sort of it frees up your mind to actually focus properly on the other things that are at hand. I mean, I feel the same way with exercise as well. I personally like to run in the morning. I feel like once I've got that component out of the way, it's sort of liberating for the rest of the day.
Right. Yeah. Well, exercise and running is a good example that the discipline is just in the start, and then it kind of takes over, right? It's very hard to check your email and the kids that distract you when you're 5 miles away from home. The habit that's helped me a lot is waking up in the morning and being disciplined not to even turn the phone on until 7 o'clock. Get up at 4:45, and you've got this beautiful 2-hour uninterrupted window. And then when you've got that frog listed and labeled, it's like, all right, you slay that first thing, get that out of the way, get a couple other things done, block out half an hour for writing, and then turn on your phone and get ambushed. Right. Then everyone else sets your agenda for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And like you said earlier, we look to be, numb by the mundane. The things that we're kind of good at, that we do, that are killing time. But especially if you're running a business, it's like, is this making the boat go faster? Right. The things that just make me comfortable. And if it's not, you really want to look at that and figure out where we can get thrust from.
Yeah. The morning work thing, when you get it done early, is really quite fulfilling. It's a bit like that saying that every hour of sleep before midnight counts for 2. I always feel like every hour of work before 10 a.m. counts for 2. You can really hit that hard. And there's just that feeling of hitting 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning and thinking, we're not even halfway through the day, and I've done a day's worth of work here,
Right. I think that the distinction for me, in my mind, is the difference between being busy and being productive, right? Productive towards our goals. And the multiplying factor in leadership is teaching your young leaders how to do this, right? So if it's not a matter of them getting up before dark, if they're working till 3 o'clock
Sure,
in the
of
morning,
course, yeah.
it's where do you get that 90 minutes of pure thrust towards the bigger goals every day? And, when I was running bars and restaurants, it was starting with 20 minutes a day. And as small as that sounds, you can get a lot done on certain things. You can make one key call. You can, rough out one format for something that you're doing in 20, 30 minutes. And let's say it's 35 days a week, and 2.5 hours of working on the business rather than working in the business with young leaders is a massive muscle to start forming, right? And once they get that, 30 minutes goes to 45, 45 eventually gets to 2 hours. Very few leaders in our industry do 10 hours a week on the business. A lot of them do 70 hours in the business, but that's kind of going nowhere if you're not working on the business.
Storytelling is the number one skill of the host.
Yeah, the host of the business, the host of the front door, the bartender. I think in hospitality, I know I get to work with hundreds of businesses. The best storytellers win, right? You look at even on outbound with marketing, right? A lot of businesses are like little kids. They scream to get your attention, and when you turn around, they don't have anything to say, right? So instead, if we're going to ask for someone's attention, we better be ready with the hook, right? We better be ready with why this matters. We better be ready with, are we going to connect them to something bigger? We better be ready to add value to them and what they're doing, even if we have their attention for 15 seconds. And if you think about that through the chain of the business, I firmly believe that a cocktail tastes much better with a great story. Right? I can tell you, I could sit here all day and tell you about restaurants that I've been to, about a dish that blew me away. And when I sat down and thought about it, all of them were accompanied with an incredible story about the original recipe, a way that someone prepared it, the way that a supplier grows a certain vegetable. They all had a story that connect me emotionally. All my senses are then turned on, and then I begin to consume, and it's cemented. And the best stories are packaged in a way that the guest, the receiver, becomes the hero, right? It's packaged so smartly that I can then tell that story after only hearing it once for 30 seconds or for 90 seconds, right? And then I turn around with those drinks and bring it back to the table and say, did you know? Right? Now I'm the hero. So that's storytelling at the nth degree.
Yeah, I sometimes feel like, depending on the guest, you need like either a sort of 10-second pitch, a 30-second pitch, or maybe like a 5-minute about the thing that you're serving, because it depends on the environment as well, right? The situation. Right. Some people are in a rush. For example, a pub bartender versus a cocktail bartender, it might be quite a different setting and a different requirement for the guests. But having that in your arsenal to be able to do a kind of top line, a kind of longer form, and then the full dissertation if the need requires it.
That's right. And I think the art to great and sustainable hospitality is that diagnostic, right? Being able to teach, especially young people who may or may not have grown up with the parenting and the schooling of being a great determinant of the opportunity. But when you do that, if you think about a simple XY axis, a 3x3 matrix, right? So a guest comes towards you, I'm at the host stand or on the bartender, and two things that I might want to know on each of the axes is, one is their relationship with the business, right? First time guest versus, yeah, I've been here before, we live in the area, versus this is my place. I'm here all the time. Mm-hmm. You're new, I'm a regular. And then we look at the other axis, and we're then trying to determine, the occasion. Are they here? Is it quick in and out? Is it a business meeting? Are they here celebrating? And just from there, I can devise like 9 different playbooks for that experience. And understanding the brevity that's needed within it, the energy. When I was working, I used to work a lot with young people, and then I had my own young people. I got four kids. And, with my kids, for example, when someone would come over to our house, before we'd reach them at the door, you'd watch them walk up the driveway or across the lawn if we're outside. And I'd say to them, look at those folks, rate their energy right now, out of 10. And they'd look and they'd say, I don't know, 4 out of 10, Dad? I said, okay, why? And they'd look again, they'd say, no, 6 out of 10. Right? Because that's how we want to receive someone. We want to walk up to them, greet them affectionately, close that space between us, and mirror their energy. And our goal is always to move them up, right? Move them up at least 2 levels. So if they're 6 out of 10, move them to 8. Now you put that in a restaurant environment, someone comes in from a funeral with a 1 out of 10 energy, they don't be greeted by that happy-go-lucky 10 out of 10 slapping you on the back, right? We've got to rate, mirror, and then escalate, right? So that's the experience with the story in there. The story is very different with someone who's here for the first time, right? You need not spend a lot of time on specials. They want to know what made you special, right? The items that are important to the business, that are guaranteed home run. On the other end of the spectrum, right, they've had all those dishes before, and they're looking for something new and interesting. And then someone in between is something in between.
The rate component of this, what tips or observations do you have for how you go about assessing someone's current mindset, what it is they're there for, and so that you can execute?
Yeah. So this is the ultimate complexity of our industry, right? If we were a quick service, if I ran a McDonald's, I could have nearly the identical playbook for every person coming up. Fast, friendly, efficient, get your food out, thank you, goodbye.
No one's there to hear about the ingredients, really, are they?
No. They're in fact, they forbid you to talk about what may or may not be in that food. No, but in this regard, you know, if I was to start on the most basic level, which is where I encourage people to start, we make a lot of assumptions that people know what we know. And so if we didn't do that, and the story I love about this, I did a leadership program years ago at the Wooden Leadership Foundation in California. Coach Wooden is the winningest coach in American history. Coached the UCLA basketball team, I think 11 championships. Coach Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, John Wooden, John Walton, all these famous players. But first day of training camp for the freshman class, he calls them all in and sits down in a circle and says, all right, fellas, so these are 18-year-old men. And he says, all right, fellas, I'm going to ask you to take off your shoes and socks. And they say, okay, here's your new socks and here's your new shoes. I'm going to show you how to put them on. And he shows them exactly how to put on a pair of socks. This is before form-fitting tube socks and all that. He'd show them how to wiggle them up, how much space to leave here. This is how you do your laces up. Now, he had some kids from the inner city that thought they were being talked down to, right?
Yeah.
You're being racist talking to me like this. And Coach Wooden went ahead, starting at the start and working his way up. And at the end, he told the story. He said, you know, guys, 3 years ago, my best player, he said, I didn't realize I made a mistake, that he played all season and his socks were bunched up. He got these huge blisters. And in the final game, he couldn't get a shot off. He couldn't roll off his right foot because he's hitting these blisters and he's in pain. And it's throwing a shot off, a millimeter, which over space becomes half a foot. And we lost the championship. And he said, that was my fault. So I'm going to show you and make no assumptions with you guys. And kind of built them up from there. So in hospitality, you know, someone walks through the door, and I'd say to young staff, does this group look like a rock or a sponge, right? Are they looking around for clues? They want to talk to people. They want to know about us. Or do they look like they're here for a business meeting, and all they want is a table, a coffee, their meal quickly, and they want us to be invisible. So we go from that level to the next level up, looking at their energy, looking for physical and oral cues about not only what they are asking us for, but what they might like. Right? That they might not even think are available to them. We hear these things as we go through. Reading that audience and finding your shot to blow them away is everything. You get all the basics right, and then you find that opportunity to take it to the next level. This is when people come back.
Yeah, and I think it becomes quite venue specific as well. You tend to get a certain split of demographics that come into any given venue because obviously it's got limited geography, you know. It can only be the people that are in the area. And over time, I found that you can internally start to categorize all of your guests into a few different categories. You know, it's like, oh, right, you know, they're office workers. No, these guys are like creatives. Okay, this is a couple that are currently visiting town. You know, they're on holiday, and so on and so forth. And then once you have that sort of internal categorization of the demographics that you get in, it then becomes a lot easier to make assumptions about what it is they probably want from their experience.
That's right, yeah. And looking at it as a collective, you've got this group and you're doing that rating, you're finding a way to make this an amazing experience. You get the real masters. Not long ago, about a week ago, my kids are very rarely all in the same city and place, but all 4 of them were there. So we took them out, table for 6, and this woman came and served us. And I mean, it was like a master class in hospitality. She had 6 people. At some point, she had us all engaged on different things, right? The younger kids about this, I've got 2 kids that are working in the town. Just telling them about this is what you should be looking for and what you should be doing. My girlfriend about something else, me about the agave collection, introduced me to someone who was at the bar who's also in the industry. And I went up to her, I said, I just can't believe it. Like, I talk about this all the time. It's very rare to see it in the wild, right? And between us, it wasn't happening at other tables, right? So this is a unicorn that wandered into the business. But imagine reverse engineering it from her. And I said to the manager when I was there, I said, you need to clone this person, this behavior.
Clone this behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all of the sort of strings that she's got between different people and herself that she's sort of holding in her mind to be able to do that kind of thing. I was at on my way to Mexico recently and had the sort of slight misfortune to be in Dallas airport for quite a few hours. But there was a bar there, and the host, the server behind the bar, bartender I guess you might call him, was pretty... almost like Darren Brown levels of like mind control and stuff going on. He asked our names as soon as we sat down, very friendly, great, energized, all this kind of thing. Definitely changed the whole kind of mood as soon as we sat down. We were like, okay, this is gonna be fun,
Right.
Took our names, and there was this was an island bar, but there was maybe 20 people sat around this bar, and I heard him taking everyone's names, and then he was calling people out, and got into a bit of a rapport with him, and I said to him, you don't know everyone's name around this bar, though, do you? And he went, yeah, I do, watch this. And he went around every single person on the bar and said their name and then said something about them as well.
Yeah.
Something that he'd picked up or where they were going, who they were, their profession, who they were with. Remarkable memory skills. And to be able to have that skill and then to deploy it well so that people feel special.
Right.
Just, that's what you want, right?
Yeah. We had a guy when I was living in Sydney that I used to take my staff to see, and he was amazing. He was probably 15, 20 years my senior. He had owned a restaurant before that he sold. He said it failed, but he got out, and he went back to bartending. It's what he always loved to do. And so sit down, like you say, we're at this kind of horseshoe bar, and the way he's interacting with everyone. So I've got 2 of my new staff with me. And at the end, they said, I can't believe this guy's memory and everything else. And I said, Michael, is it okay if we come back and have a look? And we go back, and there's Post-it notes underneath for everybody. And they said to me, he's cheating. And I said, what is he cheating at? And they said, well, he's written all this down. I said, you think a guy with that big a heart, who, if he could remember it all, he would have.
Yeah.
I couldn't, So he wrote it down because he's thoughtful, and saying someone's name makes him feel important. Mm-hmm. He wrote down things about them, and then he has his book of like regulars. He stacks all these things, he organizes them. I think he's one of the best in the business. I don't think he's cheating anybody or anything.
That's just a protocol, right? That's it.
Yeah.
Being average equals bankruptcy.
If you work in an industry that 8 of 10 businesses fail in 5 years, number one, you should get your head checked, right? If you're putting your money against it, as I have, as you have. And number two, realizing that being average is you're broke, right? It's only a matter of time. I think 60% go broke in a year or two, right? So if you go into it knowing that, we're going to reverse engineer from there. We're going to say, well, I really fell in love with the work of Charlie Munger, who only died a few months ago, right before his 100th birthday. And for those that don't know Charlie, his partner is much more famous with Warren Buffett, and they're the partnership behind Berkshire Hathaway. Charlie was the assessor of the deal. He decided, and a lot of deals he turned away because they were too complicated, right? They're simple guys. They make most of their money off Coca-Cola, right? But they make billions on other things. And Charlie became famous for this inverse thinking, right? So he said, how could we guarantee failure in this business, right? So you think about a restaurant. How could we guarantee failure? Well, we would make the point of contact with the guests, the decision maker on whether they were coming back again, our minimum wage employee, with no induction program, right? Throw them in the deep end, blame them for everything, have their schedule randomized, maybe make them work nights and weekends, right? There's a lot of ways that guarantee failure. But
that all sound kind of familiar.
They all sound very familiar. So then we say, all right, well, how do we reduce these aspects, right? So on the induction part, as an example, with my restaurant group, we said, we can't trust ourselves. We're going to try to hire the best people, but we make a lot of mistakes when it comes to hiring because people can act a certain way. but I've never met anyone that can act a certain way for 100 days in a row, right? So when we put them into the environment, we let people know, we're going to pay you, you're going to work here, and we're both going to decide whether we want to be together for the foreseeable future in 100 days' time, right? And are you able to demonstrate the behaviors that qualify you as an A player within this business? And I also realize that people aren't dishwashers, right? We can't unplug a dishwasher across the street and plugins can perform the same way. At my own businesses, I took my best player from venue A and put them at venue C. They not only hated it, they performed poorly. They didn't react well to the leadership. They didn't love the guests. They didn't even like some of the products. And it was very hard for them to be disingenuous in trying to sell things they didn't want to consume themselves, right? So when we look at it that way and we say, how do we set ourselves up for success? We really just have to look first at the 5 or 7 factors that could almost guarantee our failure and say, can we isolate this all together or can we engineer to reduce that risk?
Such an interesting way of looking at it. Rather than trying to look at what makes you is going to be successful, it's just looking at what's guaranteed to make you fail. And those are actually, in a way, more tangible, aren't they? It's
right.
Kind of obvious that those things are bad. Whereas what makes something great, it's just a little bit harder to kind of put your finger on it, I think.
That's right. Well, you think about in the absence of any other training, which a lot of businesses are engaged in, right? We'll just open and see how we go. Then we say, just apply the golden rule. Treat people as if you'd like to be treated. I have 4 children I love deeply. I don't want to be treated like they get treated, right? I don't want to be treated like they treat each other. I want to be treated like their 51-year-old father who knows enough to know what a good restaurant is and a bad. And so, the platinum rule then says treat people like they want to be treated, which means that there's infinite variables now, right? That's the skill of the industry. Hiring people who resonate with your brand, who are willing to unlearn what they've learned. They've already had social proof that doing X makes them successful, but here it doesn't, right? Here you need to leave that behind and do Y instead. And then read this guest as they are. We talked about rocks and sponges earlier. They could come in as rocks and become sponges, and then become rocks again, right? It's a very difficult to be constantly reading and adapting to what's happening in front of you. Add to that, you have 1,000 things to do. Carry hot food, run from here to there, deal with the chef, run to the bar, POS, all of that. But the most important thing, there's a book that I read not long after I sold my restaurant group that I believe I would have been so much better as a restaurateur had I read before. And it's called The Ultimate Question. It's the thrust behind the Net Promoter Score. Quite simply, it says that the ultimate question is one question. You can add a second to the survey, but he says a third or fourth would compromise the survey. And the question, quite simply, is how likely are you to recommend us to your friends and family based on your experience here today? On a scale of 0 to 10. That's it. You think about the genius behind the question. So how likely are you? You have all the power to recommend us, which you just experienced, to the people you care about most. How likely are you to put your reputation on the line with the people you care about most for us? And here's what the data shows, that 0 to 6 means they become detractors of your business. Someone rates you 6 out of 10, is at the office, and said, hey, I'm thinking about going to ABC Bar tonight. They pop their head out of a cubicle and say, oh, wait a second, I wouldn't go there. It's not bad, but this place down the road probably has what you're looking for. 7s or 8s, when I was in the school system, if I got 8 out of 10, I'd have been delighted. 7s or 8s means we're neutral, right? We had a deal. You had food, beverage, and a seat. I came in, I gave you my money for that. The deal's over. I'm likely to forget you in 30 days' time. And if somebody does bring up your name, I'm going to tell them about the 9 or 10 that I experienced. 9 or 10 are promoters of your business. 10 out of 10 are these raving fans. And if you've ever owned a bar or restaurant before, you know them, right? You had 100. I believe if you have 500 of them, you can't fail. And you got to keep them. But these are the people that drag their friends and family in, that the other customers ask, is that guy one of the owners here? And they give you the worst advice and ideas. Those people. But I learned to love them, right? Like they're trying to help. But the 9s and 10s are your promoters, 0 to 6 are your detractors. And if you can, like the woman I mentioned earlier, the server earlier, her goal, I said to her, what's your secret? Like, you're really good at this. I said, I think you're good at it. So tell me why you're good. And she said, I learned the business, the menu, the things they want me to do. And she said, I look at everyone as an individual and I just want them to leave here really happy. right? So she's looking at my 14-year-old, my 16-year-old, my 19-year-old, my 21-year-old, my girlfriend and myself. We all want different things. And she found something, and she had a massive section, right? She found something for all of us in there. Every single one of us. I said, how do you rate her when we left? Everyone said 10 out of 10. You know how rare that is?
But she's executing that ultimate question, right? I mean, that's how you're going to get a 10 out of 10, right?
Right.
Just make those people feel happy.
Right.
And if you can do it to every single person, that's the incredible thing. You know, most servers, even a good server, might have targeted you and your girlfriend and maybe ignored the kids a little bit.
That's right.
You
Yeah,
know?
absolutely. Yeah, and some people just target the person paying, right? That's the person who's going to decide on the tip.
Yeah.
But, you know, with
They're not the only person giving recommendations to their friends.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. It's so powerful. And, you know, with her, she's born that way. She's born to serve, like I am. I go to a party and I'm more comfortable picking up dirty dishes than I am having small chat with somebody, right? So people are always saying, hey, take it easy. You're here to have a good time. I said, I am having a good time. And then when I'm picking up dirty dishes and I find someone I want to talk to, then I kind of work my way into the conversation.
You're like Bill Murray, you know, he keeps turning up to parties and washing dishes. Have you heard about that?
I've heard that. That's me.
It's literally his party trick.
Oh,
He'll
yeah?
turn up to a random party and he'll be in the kitchen just washing up.
Right.
And people are like, what the fuck? Bill Murray's in our kitchen.
Yeah.
He's done it a few times.
Right. Well, dishwashing is the best job I've ever had.
Yeah,
So
well.
I loved it. So
I tell you what, I had not my first job in hospitality, I think it was my second. I did a stint bartending, which I was terrible at when I was 17, 18. And then my first job that I enjoyed doing in bars and restaurants was dishwashing. And I spent nearly a year washing dishes. I ended up sort of getting upgraded to like menial kitchen tasks like grating cheese and slicing bread and chopping up vegetables. But it remained that way for a long time. But I got pretty good at it. I liked it. You know,
Yeah.
it was something that it was my zone, my area, and I could perfect the craft of washing dishes.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people would laugh at. There's no craft in washing dishes. It's like, well, you know, let's have a dishwashing challenge at some point, then I'll show you that
Right.
there is a craft and a flow, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And I think jobs like that too, like, you know, as a parent, years ago I went to this course, a 3-day course for parenting. I realized that I'd gotten my wife pregnant, had no idea what I was getting myself into, right? You need a driver's license to drive a car. You need nothing to be a parent. So I'm like, you know, how do I not fuck this up, right? And so I go to this course, and the first 2 hours were like, what's your purpose as a parent? Like, what do you want to do? What are you trying to accomplish? I'm like, well, isn't that obvious? Don't we all want the same things? You know, our kids to be happy and healthy and all this. And they said, well, those are kind of byproducts of what your purpose is. So at the end of 2 hours, or maybe it took me longer, I came up with 2 words that to this day are still my purpose as a parent. That's to instill confidence in these kids. And when I think about how you get confidence, right? You need experience at different things. You need varied experience. You need an opportunity to make a lot of mistakes, right? And be able to pick yourself up in a relatively safe environment, and so on and so forth. And when I thought, what's the perfect environment to be able to do that? I think it's hospitality, right? What other job, who else owns a business is going to give my 17-year-old daughter to be the face of your business? She's a host, right? And now she's getting to be a server. She's almost 18. Transact in your business, handle your computer system, right? Be customer service, move plates to tables, like make the product, like, you know, there's just no other industry.
No.
And then, you know, she comes home and tells me stories about, you know, these crazy customers that came in and were, you know, imagine it, 2 45-year-old men being rude to a 17-year-old girl. And she's understanding, hey, the world can be pretty ugly. And on the flip side, there's a lot of beauty that she's seeing. And she's interacting with coworkers from Mexico and Peru and Australia and France. And like, you know what, it's just this beautiful opportunity. And I think the 3 skills that I valued most were being able to create instant rapport with people, right? My kids will tell you, I've never been in an elevator where I didn't make someone smile, right? I just find them awkward places unless you make them not awkward. I can build rapport with anybody. Secondly is sales, right? Sales is just about influencing another person towards something of a mutual win, right? If you're selling so that they lose and you win, that's not a good thing. And then thirdly is marketing, like a reason to return, right? Creating that relationship and then attaching it to the future, right? So all 4 of my kids are learning that in the hospitality industry, and it works with any industry, right? Any industry, there's a main connection, human to human. You've got to be able to sell and you've got to be able to market. I think that's the gift that a lot of leaders in our industry don't look at. And, I framed it that way when I was in Sydney, and I would talk to my customers, say, this is what I'm teaching kids that come to me. We had 22 to 24 qualified job applicants for every opening. And it wasn't just kids, it was people of all stripes coming to learn better life skills. And I said, I'll give you a place to practice, pay you to do this. And the better you are at it, if you're a bartender or server, you get more money that night. Instant bonus.
Yeah, it is remarkable how great a sort of training ground the hospitality industry is. As you say, the people skills that's required in order to make someone happy and give them a great experience, the sales skills and the marketing, and then, there's other things like accounting, and if you really get into the sort of craft side of it, then there's the skill of mixing and the sort of science of that and ingredients and creativity. And then also you get history and anthropology comes into it. There's really, artistry, there's not really much missing from it, that can't be applied to something else. I'm struggling to think of what there is that is missing. But I think especially for young people, it's so great for the people skills and developing that, because that's going to set you up for life, whether it be in work or in relationships.
Yeah. And the perspective too of, what is a good business and what isn't, what is great leadership and what isn't.
Yeah.
One of my daughters just was at one place for a couple of years. It was her first job. She's gone to a new place now because the old place is closing down, not for terrible reasons. The lease is up after 30 years or something. And she's at this new place now. And she's like, Dad, I can't believe how good it is. This is happening and that's happening. And somebody said to her, one of my friends said, yeah, you were at one of the worst run businesses in the city. And she said to me, Dad, how could you have let me work there? And I said, well, hold on, it wasn't dangerous. And I said, it sets great perspective, right?
Yeah.
Like, you should never work at a business like that. Like, I said, what are the top 5 things you didn't like about that? And she told me right off the top of her head, she knew. And I said, now when you interview the next company you work for, make sure those aren't present there, right? Until you've experienced something, you don't really know how it shows up in your life.
Yeah.
But now she knows, and she'll build on that as she goes.
Yeah. And like experiencing, I know we want our kids to, have the best and to enjoy their lives. But there's something in a little bit of hardship and a bit of suffering, that helps you grow and become better and then learn and then not make the same mistake again.
Right.
Or expect better.
Well, if someone was to hire you and said, hey, I'm about to give birth, and say, I want you to coach me on developing an effective human being, right? There's no way you would say, give them everything they want. Don't teach them any delayed gratification. Let them put anything they want into their body. Your whole job as a parent is to just appease them and dance around and make them laugh. You would let them learn and grow and suffer. And goals, all of my kids, I've done pretty well in business. I'm not buying any of them cars. Like, they don't have any of that. I said, you want it? My 17-year-old now has $7,800 towards her car, and she needs $11,000 for the car that she wants. Friends, most of the people in my neighborhood buy their kids cars. I said, why would I do that? Go back to...
It's not teaching you anything. Well, it is teaching you something, but it's not a good thing.
Right. And it's something, again, back to Warren Buffett. I went to the Berkshire Hathaway quarterly shareholder meeting. It's in an arena, and it's amazing. It's every year. Well, every quarter, I guess, but I was at the annual one. And at the end, they take like an hour of just free questions. Anything you want. Charlie and Warren are sitting on the stage, and this reporter put his hand up and he said, is it true that you're not leaving your kids anything in your will? He's worth billions of dollars. And he says, yeah, no, that's true. Zero, not a penny. And they're like, can I ask why not even $1 million each or whatever else? And he's just so sincere. He says, oh man, I would never rob my kids of their journey.
Yeah, I've heard that one before. It's great.
He said, I remember my first $10,000 bank balance. So do I. I remember my first $100,000. I remember my first 7-figure transaction. Nobody gave me that, right? And the thing is, once you know how to put $1 million or $2 million in the bank and the investments and so on and so forth, no one can ever take that away from you. You give a kid $2 million, it's unlikely they're going to be able to hold it, and very unlikely they're going to be able to repeat it. right? So that's how I've seen that whole operation is like, let's teach people how to do this from the ground up. And, as an employer, I like to think that people that were with me for 3 years were 3 years way better off, not just 3 years older than having worked for me.
We'll get back to the show shortly, but first I wanted to give a shout out to our sponsor, Fevertree. I have been using Fevertree since 2006 when I opened the bar at Jamie Oliver's 15 restaurant in Cornwall, and right through to present day where we still use Fevertree at Blackrock in East London. As a maker of drinks myself, I take very seriously the outsourcing of the sourcing of ingredients. But Fevertree are the brand that told us that if 3/4 of your drink is your mixer, you had damn well better pick the best one. Or words to that effect. Right now, it's Fevertree Ginger Ale that I'm reaching for. Right now, it's Fevertree Ginger Ale that I am reaching for. Right now, it's Fevertree Ginger Ale that I am reaching for, which is the perfect foil to whiskey in a whiskey highball. A good ginger ale extends a whiskey out. It dumbs down the alcohol a little bit without muting the flavour of the scotch itself. Fevertree know this, which is why they source their gingers from 3 distinct producing countries: India, the Ivory Coast, and Nigeria. Like blending whiskey, each ginger brings something to the table, combining together to offer aromatic intensity, a nice calm spice, and a long depth of finish. To learn more about Fevertree, check out the links in the show notes. But now, let's get back to the show. The first minute of action is worth more than a year of planning.
Yeah. I think most of the people I coach, the toughest thing is to get them to take action, to take a start. And, I've always adopted, as a guy, I haven't graduated high school. I was a gypsy for a lot of years, worked all over the world. And I realized the value in getting started and sticking with it. But it's the first minute, of fear. I'll present here tomorrow at BCB. My nerves now on that are making sure that I don't waste the audience time. But, when I was asked to speak 18 years ago in Sydney, I vomited 2 days before I did it. Certainly the night before, I was so anxious. And I thought of 1,000 reasons why I couldn't go on stage. And once I got through the first minute, I don't even remember the rest of the presentation. But one of the most difficult people was sitting right in the front row, kind of watching me. And he came up to me afterwards and he said, that moved the needle for me. I found something in there that's going to change my business. And I heard you say something that is going to affect me as a father. And I was like, wow, had I not had the courage to do that first minute, who knows what would have happened? My life would have been different. And it's the same with every great thing I've done, right? I read a quote once that said that, the most everything you want is right on the other side of that fear, and that fear is a mile wide and only an inch deep. Right? Once you step into that puddle, you realize it's just a puddle, and then you take the next step and the next step. Yeah, my experience has definitely been prioritizing action. And that's not to say that I don't plan things, but I definitely don't plan things thoroughly. I think I plan them in quickly, but in a fairly smart way, mitigating risk as much as possible. But I think risk is inevitable with anything great, and you have to execute to fully understand the lay of the land and understand where the challenges are, and then you can work on your feet. Right. And resolve those problems as and when they come at you. Yeah. But if you spend all your time planning, you might be planning for things that are never going to happen, or planning for scenarios that don't play out the way you expect them to, and you don't know because you didn't do it. I love the acronym for FEAR, F-E-A-R, false evidence appearing real. Yeah. And it often is. What I think is going to hurt me doesn't, and sometimes it's something else, right, that I didn't even think of. But I've failed a lot more than I've succeeded. And I think with a lot of things, like if I'm in the market and doing something and going for contracts, like I'll fail 5 or 6 times before someone else even gets started, right? And I just learn every time and course correct and grow. And by the time I hit it the 6th time, like I feel like I've been there before, right? Like I've taken all that momentum with me, and somebody else might just be still planning beside me. And then I get the work and I'm off and rolling.
How do you deal with failure today?
I think a part of me, still expects to fail more than I succeed. And in a new way, I'm more confident today than ever, in a quiet way, in that, the things that matter most in my life are working right now. My relationship with my girlfriend, 4 happy, healthy kids. I sold my company of 22 years. That felt good. I'm coaching people I love. I'm traveling the world. So anything I start now, I'm pretty selective in what I do. And that's, I think that's part of the key for life, right? If you take care of your foundation, if you take care of the things that matter most, like the auxiliary things that I'm going for and stretching for, if I fail, I'm not saying they don't matter, but they're just not going to take me down. Right? And I really don't plug myself into anything that's going to take anybody else down. I'm just not at that stage in my career anymore. I don't need people's investment money. I don't want to be the linchpin in a project for a public company. I've done all that. And now I just want to contribute in the things that I'm good at.
Spending 70 plus hours a week running your bar is not a badge of honor. It's a sign that your model is broken.
Yeah. Well, and that was one of the most painful lessons in my life. So I hit a point, I was only 31 years old. I had a bunch of bars and restaurants in Sydney. I was nearly 300 pounds, which is about 100 more than I should be. Drinking all my calories, Coca-Cola, coffee with a lot of cream and sugar. I remember the first Red Bull I ever had. Like I drank 6 or 8 of those a day. If you were creating a manual on how to kill yourself, I was writing it as I was going. And, but what I had was my bravado, right? And I wish I could say I was working 70 hours. I was doing 80, 90, 100 hours a week at that point, trying to keep everything together. And I went to the doctor. My companies had grown, and they wanted to put key man insurance on me. So you have to do these special tests. And one of them's on a treadmill, which I'd never done. They hook you up to the probes and everything else. And I did a bunch of tests, and the doctor left, and he came back in. And he said, well, number one, I can't authorize you for key man insurance. You're just not healthy enough. And I said, dude, I'm an ex-athlete. I played competitive hockey in Canada, and I'm 31 years old. He said, I don't care who you were. I'm talking about who you are today. And he said, number two, he said, I don't say this to many people, but you're on track to killing yourself. He said, your body is not going to keep up with what you're doing. It just isn't. Your body's not built to do with the life you've chosen. And I remember being just numb, and then I don't even know if I said goodbye to him. I just didn't know what to say. I walked outside and I sat on a bench and I just started to cry. And I just said, how did I get here? What I thought was my asset was my time and hard work and pushing and all of that was going to kill me. And then I realized, man, I'm going to kill people around me. Like, I can't live this way and expect other people to live this way. And I decided at that point that, I needed to get back to being a good husband. I definitely wanted to be a good father. My 2 eldest kids had already been born. And I just decided that, I'm not a 9-to-5 guy, but if I can't make my career work in 40 hours, then I need to pick a new career. Right? I don't want to wake up in 20 years and my kids not know who I am. And, so I started making changes that day. And it took me about 2 years. I don't want to make anyone listening think that, oh yeah, you just flip a switch and you go. Like, I had to have conversations with all my partners. At that time, I had a couple of investors. I had to talk to them about what I was doing. I can tell you, they didn't encourage me to cut back, right? Not everyone, it turns out, was looking at my best interest. They were looking at their best investment, which they invested in the old me. What I can tell you, though, is that over the course of 2 years, not only did I be able to regain my health, I was a much better operator. I made them more money. I bought them out, actually. I fast-tracked, and they made multiples on their investment. I was a much better employer. I was a much better restaurateur. And then I sold shortly afterwards, but it was a big change for me.
I mean, again, it sounds like, it's something that was unexpected and a setback. You're able to kind of pivot from it and learn and then improve as a result of it.
Right. And I think getting perspective. So at that time, one of my mentors said to me, I went to him and told him what the doctor said, and he said, well, I've told you something similar. I don't always listen, even though I've sought his advice. And he said, all right, I think you're ready to go and see this gentleman who was in North Sydney. And I went to see him, and he was a bit older than me, but he had a business that was 3 times the size of mine. And so I asked him, how often do you work? And look, this guy looks super fit, and he was talking to me about the charities he was involved with. I'm like, man, I barely have time to get my payroll done, and his family and everything else. And I said, what's your criteria when you're taking on new businesses here? And he said, it all has to fit into the same model. He said, it's 20-20-20. So he said, if my leadership team can't manage that property inside the 20 hours a week we have on execution, it doesn't work. If it's this orphan child that just needs a lot of attention, it doesn't work. He said, number 2, if we don't believe you can get to 20% net profit, it doesn't work. And number 3, we're all about growth businesses. So if we don't think we can add 20%, and there's a range. Some of them he's loading 20% a year on because they're new. Others it's 20% over 3 years. But he said he had this formula, 20-20-20. What stuck with me was 20 hours a week. And he said, man, think about it. Think about what you really do for a living and how you spend your time. He said, I don't meet many CEOs he said, you can't spend 70 hours a week on strategy, right? There's not that much to execute, right? So he said the actual role of running the business shouldn't and couldn't take you more than 20 hours. He said, whatever else it is you're doing, if you like doing that, have at it. But don't pretend that it takes 70 hours a week to run a business.
In your experience working with bars and restaurants of varying sizes in terms of the number of venues, is there a kind of critical point in growth where the CEO or managing director seems to be like working extreme hours? I'm just thinking like with one venue, you could of course work 70 hours, but at least you've only got one venue to manage. But if you go from 2 to 3 to 4, you're then multiple sites and spread thin potentially, but not yet big enough necessarily to have a management structure in place that you might have if you had, say, 10 venues or 20 venues. So I'm just wondering if it's like an inverted U-shaped curve where, as you get to much larger scale, like 10, 15, 20 venues, your number of hours required possibly drops off just because you're going to have such a larger management structure in the business.
Right. I think for those listening, they're thinking about the transition for the future and how they get out of what they might not want to be in now, this excessive work and the stress and so on and so forth, to a much better place. And the advice that I got back then, I was wide open. My ears were finally wide open after a doctor told me I was going to die, right? You talk about activating your ears. And, one of the things that I was told is that, I was asked, do you own your job or do you own your business? And I said, I don't know the difference. And they said, well, if you own a business, you could leave for 3 months, check in once a week on the phone, and things would be as good or better when you get back. If you own your job and you unplug yourself from it, the thing's going to fall apart, right? So I realized I owned my job at that point in my career. And then the adage that the more valuable you are to your business, the less valuable your business is. Right? So if you have any plans of selling your business or getting out one day, or heaven forbid, getting sick, no one plans to get sick, but be open to the idea that as you get older, something could happen, or you might want to take care of someone who is sick. So there I am at 300 pounds and terrified about my health and want to transition. So I'm from Canada. At the time, we had a cottage in Canada, wanted to take the kids to the other side of the world. And my wife had planned to go for 2 months for the summer, be at this island. And my plan was to go for a week, including a day's flight, so 5 days, right? And so I said, she said to me, why don't you come for 2 months? And I said, it'll all fall apart. And she said, you have 3 months to get things ready. So I wrote up on the whiteboard at work, you're going to put this business in a box. We're going to systematize everything now. I do this with clients now with AI. We do it in a 20th of the time. But back then it was pretty manual. We recorded things. We documented them. If this, then that. Every question that was brought to me as the CEO of the company, we put into a 1-3-1 format. So if you came in with a question, you had this little slip of paper, and we said, what's the one thing we're trying to solve? Not the world's problems, but just one particular thing. What are 3 options to solve that problem? And what's the one you think I'm going to choose? Circle the one. 8 or 9 times out of 10, they knew what I was going to say. So I said, well, go ahead and do it. right? And the one time it didn't, it's that teachable moment. So we did this for 3 months. And then the deal was, I'm going to be available for 30 minutes a week, Thursday at whatever the time worked out between Sydney and Toronto time, for 30 minutes. And I was nervous as hell all week. And I get to Thursday. I couldn't wait for Thursday, right? Because I was addicted to being the smart guy, the yes guy, the answers guy, nonsense, like a child. So the phone rings on time, and 2 members of my leadership team, and they said, hey, we got 2 questions for you, Sean. I said, okay, hit me. And they tell me yes, no, whatever. And I said, okay, what else? They're like, that's it. That's all we've got for you this week. And I thought, okay, one of my board members is messing with me. They're helping them out or whatever. Next week, 2 questions. Next week, 1 question. The following week, they wrote me and said, we can skip this and pick up next week. I got to tell you, on a psychological level, a part of me, the small part of me, was actually disappointed, right? Like how replaceable I had become, right? But as I kept looking in the bank account, sales, profitability, looking at weekly reports, I'm like, this is working. People stepping up. There's a quote that they put up on the wall for me when I got back, and they had a dinner for me when I got back as a expression of gratitude. But the quote was that nothing grows in the shade of a grand oak tree. And they said, while I was there, no one was thinking. No one was making decisions. I had crippled everybody. Yeah. Right? And then when I got tired, the organization slowed down. Right? So you step back and let people grow, and it worked.
If you micromanage everything, then you're not giving anyone else the opportunity to take accountability for it.
That's right.
Yeah. That sensation you got of being slightly disappointed that you were maybe replaceable or not needed as much as you thought you were. Do you think that is possibly the cause of a lot of people who are overworked in the industry? They like the feeling of feeling like they are the key man and the things will fall apart if they're not there?
Yeah, for me, I at that time physically I was unfit, but I was also mentally unfit, and so I started in therapy for the first time back then. And one of the first thing that my therapist said to me is that, in my focus of new people coming into the industry and foreign workers coming in as dishwashers and so forth, and a lot of my programming was focused on that. And she said to me, "You're going back in time to rescue your 12-year-old self." Right? And I was, and I still am. Right? I realized that you can do anything if somebody first, it's not a handout, it's a hand up if someone's helping you activate. And I realized that up until that point, the school system had told me that I was a failure over and over again publicly. They had shamed me and made me feel like a total failure. I was a competitive hockey player. Then I started playing with friends that went off to the NHL. They told me really quickly, the league told me really quickly, there was a disparity between my hard work and their natural talent. And then when you get natural talent and hard work put together, I couldn't compete, right? They were just better than I was. So all of these failures in my life, and then I get into hospitality, and I have this success from this muscle memory, doing this thing over and over again, and I became addicted to it. And I thought, if not this, then what, right? So if I don't keep myself in the heat, who am I and what do I do? And it wasn't until I stepped back to realize, wow, there's a wonderful life, and I can keep growing.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you say to someone who says, well, I lead by example. So I'm going to do 50, 60, maybe 70-hour weeks, and I'm going to be there on the floor. I'm going to jump in and wash the dishes. I'm going to be serving the guests. I'm going to be writing the menus and printing them. I want to show to my team that actually, being multi-skilled and being available to do everything is a key component of a good worker. And I'll do that by hard graft myself, as an example.
I ask myself this question all the time, right? Is the example I'm leaving who I'd like for people to be or to grasp onto? Am I happy to begin with, right? If I'm working a job and I'm miserable, do what I'm doing and obtain my misery, right? So if you are happy, you're genuine in what you're doing your art. Yeah, I think there's some beauty in that. But do you need to lead by example 70 hours a week? Right? Some of the best restaurateurs, you think about people like Danny Meyer in the States and friends of mine that run a company called Zingerman's. They lead by example 2 or 3 hours a month. They teach every new person coming into the organization face to face for a day or two. That's leading by example, running around with your hair on fire in a restaurant and people not knowing, are you doing this because you're the owner, or do you really need to wash the dishes right now? That's a big difference, right? Are you doing this because you're on the edge of bankruptcy, and is that why you seem like such a dick? But you're leaving people to make all these assumptions, all right? Very different than demonstrating your art at the appropriate time.
Act like every single customer has a sign around their neck that says, "Make me feel important."
Yeah, I think that is the key to hospitality, right? We talked about earlier that every individual not only comes in with individual needs and wants, but they evolve throughout the visit when they're with you. And, I just meet people, like, put it this way, if you go into a bar or restaurant that is consistently great, I can almost guarantee you there's a pretty great system in place there to do that. If you're going to go into one that's consistently poor, there's a system that governs that. For example, right before I came here today, and I won't name names, I'm at a hotel down the road where a lot of the speakers for the convention are. I'm almost certain we couldn't have got service with a flare gun. Right now it's kind of a lobby bar, so it's not like we're in a proper restaurant, but there's a restaurant there, and the bar's there, the staff can see us. If I had shot the bar with a flare, I don't think they would have come over. So I go over to the bar, and I say, "Can I get some menus?" And I'd like some drinks and whatever else. And they weren't thrilled to be doing that. Like, they just, I'm not sure what their main function is, but it wasn't taking care of me. And so I get the menus, and of course I got to go back to order my food. And it's 11:30, and I said, "Here's what we'd like." And she goes, "Well, the kitchen doesn't open till 12. And I said, "Oh, I'm confused. It says right on the menu, 11 o'clock till 11 p.m. And she said, "Well, there's two factors to that." And so I looked down, there's nothing written below it. And she said, "It has to do with the hotel occupancy and the mood of the chef." I said, "Are you serious?" I said, "You said that out loud?"
That sounds like a comedy sketch.
Yeah. I said, "If anything, you should write that down on the menu, because that's funny, but it's not appropriate, right? It's not a good business strategy." So that is a business designed to fail. Right? Like they have a hotel that must be keeping them in business. But how could you have a component that important, the face of your business, and have like bullshit rules and basically tell your customers to go screw themselves? And so I said, should I wait half an hour and come back, or will you come and see me when you start to serve food? She says, "You better come back." So that's how some businesses are designed, right? And that did not make me feel important.
Did you still stay there and order food or not?
We did, because I was getting ready to come here and Allie's working on something else. It was convenient.
Yeah.
But if I was ever in Berlin again, do you think I'm ever rushing to go back there?
Yeah.
And I will probably tell 10 people, and from stage tomorrow, 200 people about my experience.
And obviously the tens of thousands of people that listen to this. Of course, we're not naming names. But,
that's right.
I'm sure if we wanted to, we could work out where Sean's staying.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's unbelievable. The chef's mood. I mean, the chef's mood can be a contributing factor to a lot of things, but you would never pass that information on to a customer.
Right. Yeah, nor your supplier's mood. I don't care. These aren't my problems to worry about.
No.
You have a prescription on your menu of what you're doing. I didn't set this. If it said you start serving food at midnight, that's up to you. I'm only here because it said food from 11. We set up at 10. And I thought a coffee or two, then my meal. I kind of planned my day around it. And so back to the question about making someone feel important. Well, let's talk about this inverse thinking from Charlie Munger. How do you make someone feel unimportant, right? Make them a promise in writing and then break it in front of their face and tell them that the chef's mood is more important than you getting what we've promised you. How do you not make them feel important? Leave them in the corner. How do you not make them feel important? Leave all their rubbish around them, all the empty coffee cups. I brought all that up. Right? And I mean, there were 40 other people in this area. I don't make it sound like I'm out there by myself in the corner. This is a functioning business in the middle of Berlin. Right? So I could stack up the reasons how to make people feel unimportant. Those guys ticked every box today. Right? So that guarantees that I'm an active detractor of that business.
Yeah.
That's how this game works.
You're like a 2 or 3 out of 10 at this point.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
There's one of the great hospitality movies of all time, Grand Budapest Hotel.
Yeah.
There's the great quote in there, which Ralph Fiennes says. He's lecturing to the teams, and he says, "Rudeness is merely an expression of fear. People fear that they won't get what they want. Even the most dreadful and unattractive person only needs to be loved, and they will open up like a flower.
Right, right, absolutely. You know, and this is the great the opportunities that I've had. I worked years ago. My first like big job or working for a big company was working for Hard Rock Cafe in Toronto when it was still owned by the founders. And their progression in their training and coaching in their stores was that once you get to this level of competence that you know technically how to do the job, how to represent the brand and all of that, the highest level was dealing with the most difficult guests, because they thought that that's the opportunity. And they believed there was a reward onto itself in that once you unlock somebody, and you've done it before thousands of times, right? Once you unlock somebody, you feel this rush, this hard shell that they have. Once you break through, and sometimes it takes time, sometimes it takes multiple visits, but once you get through, there's this beautiful gift that you receive in that. And I learned to love that. I learned to love the challenge of dealing with people who, you know, I'm a modern father living in this year, and I have a lot of friends that tell me that they wake up in the morning, their kids ignore them, they're on their iPad or whatever it might be, they go to a job that no one wants to hear from them, they get ignored there, their buddies are all too busy doing things, and then they'll go to a bar after work for a beer on the way home. And imagine being ignored there too. Isn't that enough evidence to say you are insignificant? No one wants to hear from you, right? But instead, if someone opens up, remembers your name, remembers your drink, talks to you, asks you questions, right? Working in London, I had this boss who was a really interesting guy, but he said, you know, these bars and restaurants are full of chit chat and what he called NSW, news, sports, and weather, right? He said, you need not talk to any of our guests about news, sports, and weather. The news, you're not local, you don't know it anyways. Sports, he said, you're from the wrong country. And the weather, they've got a window, right? Leave that alone. But he said, the conversations, he said, especially, you know, peak hours, we're making green. And he said, in off-peak, we're making relationships. We're building relationships. And he said, in building relationships, the acronym was FORD, family, occupation, recreation, and dreams. He said, you hit on one of those things, and you go first, right? If it's appropriate. You lead with about your family, your occupation, and it could be this one or the one you dream
personal.
of.
It's very personal, right?
Yeah. Recreations and dreams. I used to tell people I dream of going here one day. You know, two people down, they light up and they go, oh my God, my daughter lives there now. What do you want to know about that? And we're all involved in a conversation, right? That's the training that these kids could get, the expectation that could be set upon them. And again, it just led me to a much bigger life, right? Much bigger opportunities in life by honing those skills and having the time to practice.
I was talking to someone the other day actually who said that working in a pub in the UK ought to be sort of mandated, like national service kind of thing. You've got to do a year in a pub, right? Because imagine how it would change the psychology of every citizen of a country if they all spent that time stood in a bar, serving regulars, serving strangers, learning the kind of rapport, dealing with sales and marketing and all these other things. And you've got to wonder what it would do for an economy of a country, you know, if every single person in the workforce had gone through that same training. Right.
And we all have the job or the career that we gravitate to. I think the beauty in our industry is the cross-training. So we had, as part of our induction, which, you know, took 100 days or so, you could take as long as you wanted, but most people completed it in 100 days, was 50 hours in the kitchen. And that could be washing dishes, prep, receiving goods, stock take, or preparing food. And I tell you, it did a few things for us. Number one is, I believe that the thickest wall in a restaurant is the one between the front of house and back of house, right? And if you can break that down and realize that whilst we might be from the same country, or, you know, we have a lot in common, right? In building those relationships together. Secondly, you develop a real appreciation. And we did the same for the back of house to the front of house. And realizing like that wall is pretty protective of all the jerks that don't treat us well all the time. And these inconvenient people come all at the same time. You know, they won't spread themselves out. And there's a lot of anxiety with that. And it flows in the back of house sometimes. But one I didn't think about that we got a lot of feedback on was like, you know, people would say to me, I've never cut carrots before. I've never cut food before. I've never prepared a meal. And we'd get people working in the recipes and all of that. And then understanding like, you know, what goes into the prep, and then when you're preparing on a commercial level, you're batching. And then a lot of people that work for me were single and saying, okay, well, what if you made this meal and you froze half of it in individual portions right away? You save this over 2 nights, but this could turn into this if you fry this with oil and, and add this to it. And these are all the things that we can teach in a restaurant. Instead of
proper life skills.
Yeah, there's the host stand, off you go.
Yeah.
Instead, we can do much more.
Yeah, and then build sort of empathy between the two sections of the restaurant as well.
The beautiful thing was we had people that applied in back of house that then said, I'd love to work in front. I'd love to be a busser. I'd love to be a part of this. And same the other way around. People in the kitchen said, I thought you had to have a culinary degree or you had to do something. No. You can just come and work your way up. Start washing dishes, get in the prep area, get on the line, run the kitchen one day, run the business one day.
The thing I love about this make me feel important sign around the neck is at surface level, you could be forgiven for thinking it's purely just a sort of service hospitality thing. And of course, that's a big part of it. But it also encompasses the product too, the drink or the food. Because you wouldn't give a bad cocktail to someone who's important. Right. And it also extends to the music and the lighting and the decor and everything. Because everything you do in a well-functioning bar and restaurant is geared towards really trying to make someone feel important.
That's right. That's right. Looking at, this is a book that I'm writing right now. It's really trying to decode hospitality. So if we start at the very beginning, if you ask 100 people that work in the hospitality industry, what does hospitality mean to you? Write it down in a statement. You're going to get some commonality, but you're going to get a lot of different answers, right? It means different things to different people. And some people don't even know. Isn't it service? No, service is different than I can serve you without you even noticing that I'm here. But I can't provide hospitality without you noticing that I'm here. And to me, hospitality refers to the way a person feels about themselves while they're in my company. Right? So it's not what I'm doing to you, it's what's happening as a result.
Okay.
And the first step in that is feeling important. And a lot of people get that confused with blowing smoke up someone's ass, making them feel like a big shot. Now, the first step to making someone feel important is to making them feel seen. Right? The quickest way to make somebody feel unseen is put a phone between you and them. Right? I'm at the host stand and I'm on the phone. This is more important than you. Right? I'm getting paid to take care of you. This is how unimportant you are. I'm ignoring what I'm being paid to do to chat with my friend. Right? How do you feel when that happens? Being unseen is going up to the bar and it's too deep. And the bartender, instead of them looking at you and letting you know you've been seen, I've got you. You need not worry about who comes in next. You can interact with your friend. Not doing that is your anxiety going up and saying, did that person come before me? Are they getting served now? Right? So we start there and then we work our way up to the next level and the next level. And I tell you, it's the thing I'm most proud of as a father that we just had a function because the kids are going away again. And 3 or 4 people came up to me at the end of it and said, I've never seen kids that will walk up, connect, mirror, and ask questions, even asking a question to someone that's meaningful, not how are you? No one really wants to know if your back's sore, right? But they might ask if they knew somebody, how's your daughter doing? I heard she was X, and they build on that. Or if they don't know them very well, my dad said that you're from, can you tell me about that? Or what's that like? Or all they know is that the guy's a CEO, and my youngest daughter asked somebody, said, what's it like being a CEO? Right? And he said, I've been a CEO for 25 years and no one's asked me that. Right? And you know what he said to her? It's really tough. He said, I constantly dance for the board. To which she said, what's a board? Who's on the board? Right? And he says, I'm having this conversation. And he said, it really made me think about what I've been doing for 25 years. And am I going to do it for the next 25
What
years?
is a board?
Yeah.
But that's it. I mean, it's a skill that I'm trying to develop is asking questions and responding to the answers. But, communication is such an important skill. And even in the face of AI and all the things that are going to happen, whatever they are, in the next 5 to 10 years, it feels like strong communication skills are still going to be well up there as one of the most important skills.
Right. Yeah. That, we talk about B2B and C to C, talking about H to H, human to human, right? This is where I'd encourage every parent and every employer with younger people to really triple down on developing those skills. So, for example, it's not a hack, but more of an exercise. It could work between a bartender and a guest. Is in asking a question to somebody and they answer you, that's kind of level one or layer one, and we go a layer deeper by saying, "Wow, that's interesting. Why is that important to you?" So now it makes it personal, right? I've asked you something material, now it's personal. And then the third level is, well, I understand. How does that make you feel? They've told you something. Now we've talked about its importance and its feeling. And suddenly you're involved in the conversation. And if anyone that was at my doc party is hearing this, they're going to understand how my kids got all this information out of you. But that's it. Go start at one level, go a layer deeper, and then the third layer is where the gold is.
You ever come across 100 days of rejection therapy?
No.
Oh, it's an interesting one. So it's...
Actually, my teenage years were like that. It was like 3 years of...
Yeah, most teenagers. So it's a therapy process. The idea is that for 100 days, you engage in an activity where the chances are you're going to be met with a no, or disdain, or contempt. So I'll give you some examples. Day 1, try to borrow $100 from a stranger. Day 2, request a burger refill. Day 3, ask for Olympic-sized donuts. Day 4, deliver a pizza for Domino's. So the idea, and it goes on, is like make an announcement over the tannoy on a flight and things like that.
Right.
There's a very high likelihood they're going to say no to you.
Yeah.
But in kind of practicing rejection, the idea is that it trains you to then be very sort of thick-skinned to rejection when it really matters in the future.
Yeah.
So that when I don't know, let's say you applying for a job and you don't get the role and you're getting some negative feedback, well, you can just take it on the chin and then move on and grow from it rather than dwelling on it and negatively impacting your prospects in the future.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was thinking back to when I was young, and my friend's father was instrumental in my life, and he used to coach us on a lot of things. But we were going to the dance a couple towns over, these Canadian small towns, and we were total outsiders there. It was only 10, 15 miles away, but you were a different alien in that town. And after 2 or 3 Friday nights, he said, "Hey, do you guys need a ride to the dance on Friday?" And we said, "No, we're not going to go. The girls aren't really warming up to us there." And he said, "Well, tell me how you're going about that." And he said, "Well, dancing and trying to." He goes, "I've seen you guys dance. That wouldn't appeal to me either." He said, "Listen, fellas, the numbers are pretty simple. Like if you have the courage to walk up to 7 or 8 women, on the next one, it's wide open." And he goes, "I could introduce myself to 8 women in 10 minutes. Sure enough, we went up and our numbers were like 3 or 4 in, and we just expected to fail the first few times. And even the confidence of that, changed everything for us. Rather than getting shut down once and retreating, it was like, okay, I got one out of the way. Let's get the next one.
That's it, yeah. And I think that's the problem, is that with failure, most people get burnt once and then they recoil the next time. Whereas actually, if you just persevere, statistically, it's going to happen eventually.
Right.
It just might. There might be some suffering along the way.
Yeah.
But get used to it.
Public humiliation. But yeah, I'm used to that.
A leader who isn't comfortable with numbers is like an athlete who isn't comfortable with nutrition.
Yeah. So, our industry is notorious for people running businesses that say, "I'm not a numbers guy. I'm not a numbers lady." And I think we have to step back and look at that, right? We're in business to make numbers. You don't make your numbers, you're not in business. And understanding that there's different components to the numbers, right? There are people that have to gather data. There are people that have to create reports. There are people that have to read reports, and there are people that have to move the needle on those reports, right? So you have to know who you are and who you're plugged into in that chain. And to say you're none of those people means that you're not a manager. You're not a leader in that organization. You're just a cog in the wheel, and you're probably in the way if you're in a GM role or something, and you're shying away from these numbers. And, it's, again, the quote about the thing that you want is inside the thing you're avoiding, right? So it's stepping into that and saying, what I had to say to myself is that, I learned to read numbers before I learned to read words. I learned to read when I was 21 years old. I didn't know it. I was severely dyslexic. I thought I was just French Canadian and an athlete. Where my mom's French Canadian and I was an athlete, and that was the combination I thought was slowing me up in school. It turns out I've got a pretty severe form of dyslexia, and so reading was painful. And so I learned to read numbers when I was young, working in a truck stop. And again, a very wonderful, influential person invested in me and got me going. But I say to GMs today, or anyone in management, like, you got to change your self-talk and say that, I'm learning to be great at numbers rather than I hate numbers. Anything that you hate, your lizard brain is going to back you away from. And then you got to learn how to learn, right? Like, you're not going to go and take an MBA with Harvard on this. You're going to find an easy way. There are books that almost look like children's books. That's how I started learning numbers, right? And how do you break down this equation? And then what number moves this number? And what are the contributing factors? And if I move this by 2%, does it affect the equation 2% or 20%? And then, like I say, I think the people that make really good money in our industry are needle movers, right? The people that are actually affecting those numbers through leadership and actions. And to tie back to what we said before, that's not working 70 hours a week and running around with your hair on fire. It's saying, hey, here's the numbers. Here's how we focus on it. Here are the 3 things that will change that behavior. Here's how we'll know what's happening in real time. And here's our lagging indicator with that, right? Like, that is an amazing leader that can break all that down and then coach in real time, right? Doing the job in real time, is there benefit? Sure, some benefit, but coaching someone else to be great is where the magic happens.
Well, what are your views on, let's say, a business partnership where one partner is in charge of the numbers and the other one is maybe the sort of leadership, present face of the business, the role model for the staff kind of thing?
Yeah, I think that a lot of partnerships are either born, out of necessity, or that they are a good complement in the beginning. A mentor of mine used to say, the only ship that doesn't sail is a partnership. I don't believe that. I believe they hit rocks often. But I think any partnership needs to be evaluated every year.
Yeah.
And saying, like, was the impetus for us being together and in our driving forces in the business, the roles that we play, is that still complementary to our long-term goals? Right? Most partnerships are designed to get started. Right? But what happens once you're started? And what are you actually doing and contributing on a regular basis? And you have your contribution of maybe cash in the beginning and certainly your time that you put in, but is your contribution of energy effective to where we're going? Right? I know people that work 70 hours a week. The business would be better without them working in it, right? They're just a detriment. And maybe the effort cancels out the energy, but that's not how you want to live your life. So it's looking at saying, here's what the business needs. Typically in businesses, like 15 or 20 components. Owner A is doing these 3, owner B is doing these 3. The first thing that has to be decided is, does that give you energy or take your energy away? Heat map that. And then the next thing is, could somebody do it better? Like, not could someone. We know somebody could. Would it be effective for us to pay the person that would do this better? Yeah. And if so, what would you do? And that's a question that no one wants to talk about, out loud, is like, I've done this exercise with a lot of partners in business. And sometimes if people are being honest, they say, hey, what I want to do, yeah, that's only taking me about 8 hours a week. But what I want to do is pick up my kids from school every afternoon. Mm-hmm. Maybe your partner doesn't like to hear that. But maybe you're going to be a better partner if you do that, so long as the role can get covered by someone who could do it almost as good or better than you, right? So that's kind of mapping that business. And I've been at this long enough that I have clients that I've been working with for 20 years now. And watching how they've changed. Some of them have brought their kids into the business. I knew the kids when they were little. And closing everything out for a day every year and looking at everyone's contributions and asking the real questions, just taking your energy away. What do you want to learn? What do you want to grow? What do you want to reach back into the organization? And who do you want to lift up? Figuring that out. And then who's missing, right? It's often not a what problem. We know what to do, but who is going to do these things if you don't, and what things aren't being done at the moment, right? You can get all that done in half a day to a day.
It's like relationship counseling, really, isn't it? And often partnerships can feel very much like a marriage.
Right.
But they are, you know. I mean, they're legally kind of binding as well, and there's the fallouts and the celebrations. No sex usually.
Right.
But,
Right.
beyond that, it's pretty similar, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. And you know, a friend of mine got married a little while ago, and he got advice that I think is just brilliant advice from the person marrying him, to say that this guy's name was Father Ed, and Father Ed said, you know, I've married 2,000 people over his lifetime. It's a lot of couples, 4,000 people united. And he said, that's the greatest joy of my life. He said, the greatest sadness of my life is that half of those people are now divorced. And he says, I try to call them all. He said, that's what I do with my time. I call, I have a logbook. And he said, the question I always ask is, as I marry people in the future, is, you know, what advice could I give them to avoid what you suffered? And he would, when he asked the question, why did you get divorced? Or why are you divorcing? And he said the phrase, he went through all his notes, the phrase that he heard most often was, he doesn't make me happy anymore. Or she doesn't make me happy anymore. So his advice was, he said, you need to make you happy for the both of you. And she needs to keep herself happy for the both of you, right? We don't control, we have influence on each other's happiness,
Sure.
But it's up to me to be happy, and it's
Yeah.
up to you. It's the same in a business partnership.
Yeah.
Right? You can't expect that something that you craved and got high from 5 years ago is going to make you feel that way today. But people have this guilt that, like, I was a numbers guy, so I should continue doing the numbers. Well, I've done that, and now I'm ready to pass it on to somebody to do the next thing. Or maybe even to step out of the business altogether or open something new. Right?
But if you don't have those honest conversations, that's when it can just turn toxic, because it's all simmering away underneath the surface.
Just like a marriage.
Just like a marriage. Okay. Oh, just speaking about, you mentioned about your dyslexia. So how's that been writing a book? And tell me about the book.
Yeah. So the dyslexia first, what I've learned about dyslexia, and there's an amazing new resource. Richard Branson's put up a university for, there's a lot of great stuff there for kids, but I think specifically for adults coming to terms with their dyslexia and learning to use it. Like I now know what a great gift it is, right? My brain just stores information in more locations, right? And that's very hard to access as a child, especially in your RAM. You know, you're just trying to grab something quickly. One example of like the curse of dyslexia is that in my case, the things that matter to me most are hardest to access. So the birthdays of my children, if you put me on the spot right now and ask me all 4 of their birthdays, I'd get 2 or 3 of them wrong, right? If you give me a minute and I get calm and I think about it, I'll be able to access it. But I can tell you details about my kids, and it drives them crazy sometimes. I can remember hours of their life, right, in explicit detail. So, but how it relates to writing a book is the same way. I've got documents. I brought a stack of books and papers because I'm working on a chapter of my book, and my girlfriend thinks I'm crazy, and they're all over the room, taped to the wall. That's what my brain looks like.
Like a detective drama.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But it's, you know, it's what I have, so it's what you got to work with. And now I'm getting organized and working with an editor and everything else. But the book is the working title. I don't know what it'll be called, but the working title is Decoding Hospitality, right? So the reason that I'm writing it, I've written a couple of books before that were unpublished. And my one daughter asked me if that makes me a failed author so far. But I wrote the books before, and a gentleman who was very kind to me, very influential in my life. At the time, he was the CEO of Diageo North America, and then became their global CEO, and Ivan. He passed away recently. I sent him the manuscript of my book, which the working title of that was called Business with Bars. And he was like, oh my God, he read it. He's like, I paper clipped a few pages for him to read that I thought he might find interesting, and he read it cover to cover. And he said, I want to buy it, or I want to work with it. And I thought, man, I'm an overnight bestseller, right? I'm like, this guy's got, I don't know, 18,000 employers. But what he meant was he wanted to get out to the industry. Yeah. So I did that for 8 years. So we turned them into video courses, because that's how a lot of folks learn best, myself included. And we wound up taking it. It went around to 55 countries around the world. I went to 30 countries and launched it, which seems crazy. But that was the first book. And now I've got the rights back after all these years, and I'm going to do some things with that. But this one, for a little while, I worked with distressed businesses again, and it's heartbreaking. It's really the ugliest part of a failed bar or restaurant isn't the day they close. It's the year or two before that happens. And it's not just the toll of the ownership, who often, most owners in our industry get their money from the 3 Fs: family, friends, and fools, right? So Thanksgiving and Christmas get really quiet when there's no dividend checks, there's cash calls. You seep into your business. You do, instead of 70 hours a week, you do 100 to try to save it. But you go down a couple layers, everybody suffers. And I hate that, right? Like the dishwasher, the line cook, the server, they didn't do anything wrong, right? But there's no money, there's tension and anger and everything else. So as in an effort to try to ease that and to understand, how does this happen? I started doing research and saying, well, why do 8 of 10 bars or restaurants fail? If you Google it right now, the number one reason, in my opinion, doesn't appear on any of the lists. The number one reason is the complexity of developing your own brand of hospitality and transferring that to your team, your frontline staff, and to the guest. You think about that pipe again, right? You've got to get that brand through that pipe and to the guest. And then to do it and to get those 9s and 10s, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10, over and over again. So I figured out, I kind of cracked the code. It took me about 4 years to work with my clients and figure it out. And the simple way to think about it is that if you think about like 3 gears, right, that all interact together in order to have an output. One gear is the ownership, the senior management level. They've got to do all the induction. They've got to codify the hospitality. They've got a lot to do in there, all the measurements, the numbers. Then the middle gear is the leader on duty, right? The idea, very common in the States, to have a manager on duty. I've not met many people that want to be managed or supervised, right? Adults typically don't crave that, but they want to be led and inspired. And then we have the third gear is the frontline staff: host, busser, bartender, server. The problem is that third gear is often the only thing the spotlight's hitting. They get way too much credit and all of the blame when things don't go well. And when I backed it out and said, okay, well, if we talked about making someone feel important, how do you do that? It's complex, right? If I was to walk out of here with you right now, we hit the sidewalk and we see coming towards us the CEO of Pernod Ricard, let's say. There is a very different way to make that gentleman feel important than the next person we hit is a bartender at Monkey Bar here in Berlin, right? So you have to see them, adapt, get some verbal and visual clues, take that. So you say, okay, your staff are failing at that, right? It's not happening in your restaurant or bar. Well, let's skip the leader on duty and let's go right to the ownership. Talk about how did you select these people, right? People used to say, I had 400 staff. They'd say, you have the most amazing people. How do you do this? I said, the number one thing is I've hired people that were well parented, right? It is very difficult to take an adult where, if Freud's right, the cake's baked at about age 12, to take that person and make them polite, make them curious, make them kind. So I look for those things at the interview process, and then we can teach them our system and show them how we measure results and give them real-time coaching. And then we go to the leader on duty.
It's not as much as when you buy a puppy and you insist on seeing the parents of the dog, no?
Right, that's right. So if we have the intention right, we've got the system right from the leadership owner, and then we go to the leader on duty. And I've seen this happen over and over, especially with big companies that scale out. And we're going to do W Hotel here in Berlin or whatever. They have the business system right. They know who to hire, and they've got the induction program right. But if you think about that business, I can't remember the name of that Irish racehorse that sold for $70 million, right? So you've got a horse worth $70 million. Now picture beside that a wonderful athlete that's going to ride that. But he's a current sumo champion in Japan. He's a great athlete. He's not the right jockey for that horse. Right. He's about 400 pounds too heavy, right? So it's finding the right jockey for the right horse, the business system wrapped around it, hiring great humans, inducting them, setting them up for success, and then they interact with the guest, right? Those 3 gears work together. You take one of the gears out, it's inevitable that business is going to fail.
Sure. Yeah, or chip away at the cogs on the gears, yeah.
Right.
When's the book going to be out then? Are you writing it at the moment? Do you have a date?
I'm aiming for my birthday, April 22nd in the spring.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're getting there, and it's it was supposed to be now or in the fall, and it got split into 2 books. So one chapter has turned into a whole nother book, working with the editor, and then I said, nah, I don't think so. And then I broke it out, and it's going to work. So there'll be 2 books. I'll do one in the spring, and then another one probably a year later.
Got you. I've got a book coming out in April as well.
Oh, cool.
So Agave Spirits, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll race to the finish.
Yeah. Okay, we've got a couple more left, I think.
All right.
The man who chases 2 rabbits catches neither, which is a Confucius quote.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, that's a lot of folks in this industry, right? I think that to overlay a more modern quote on it, I heard somebody say the difference between millionaires and billionaires is billionaires just say no a lot more, right? They know what their one thing is and what they're doing. They get it right, and then they just drive that machine forward and replicate it and so on and so forth. Looking back I had 8 businesses in Sydney under my control, and I ran this company, and like most companies, the 80-20 principle is that 80% of the profits came from 20% of the businesses. And my ego got in the way of me doing what I should have done with one of the businesses that was taking up way too much time. Not even just in hindsight, just in all honesty, it was never going to work, or was never going to make the money we needed to make. And my ego didn't allow me to shut it down, because I would have been perceived as a failure, right? I had the Midas touch and all this, all bullshit, right?
It's so ironic, isn't it, that the failing business is the one that takes up 80% of your time.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only way that can kind of make sense in life, I think, is with kids. Like if you have a kid who's struggling and the other kids understand that you're leaning in.
Yeah. Because you can't just close down the kid.
That's right. So, that's how I look at it today, and I try to help my clients think through it that way. Is like, again, it could be a who problem. I've had clients that I encourage to bring another partner in to get the money together to put an excellent GM in place for a year and do cool things with. But if it's not working, having the fortitude to face that and deal with that. And then it's like, once you do get success, especially in this industry, the offers just pour in. You know that. People want to give you money. They want to give you opportunities. And then for everything you say yes to, you're saying no to the things you've already committed to, right? You're just robbing them to do the new thing. And I think that when I sit with clients and lay out, and I say, okay, help me understand your priorities, right? My coach always says to me, tell me what you're committed to. And the second question always is how committed are you to your commitments? And when you lay out what you're committed to, and then you apply a score to your commitments, you realize who's getting screwed here. Yeah,
just a numeric value applied to them all would be very eye-opening for anyone, I think, to write it down. Yeah.
Right. And so, it's not necessarily one or the other, but when people say, I've got this opportunity to do this, I said, what would that come at the price of? Right? And they immediately said, well, this business needs, I said, well, okay, we'll get to the business second. What about your family? Your family thinking, I'd like to get this guy out of the house 10 more hours a week or 20 more hours a week? Is your banker think, hey, this guy should be stretched a little more? So let's just think about your life and where you ultimately want to go. And I think I'm certainly not a retirement planner, but I'm at an age now where I'm asking people, when does this end? And what does the next chapter look like? And, a client of mine in the States is doing really well in Texas, and like a lot of Americans, the dream is New York City. And I'm like, okay. I said, why don't you fly back and forth 10 times in 5 weeks? See how that feels first off, right? Just go do some research and get on those airplanes and have the delays, and try doing it in January too, when, things are spicy in New York, and see if that feels good. If that does, then the next thing and the next thing. And you know what I mean? So it's assessing a situation and then saying, does this make sense to my larger goals? Does it make sense to my family, my community? Is it going to make me better, stronger? Because sometimes doing the thing that's getting a little bit boring, but it's just starting to stack up a lot of cash and making a lot of sense, that makes more sense than doing things with your family or whatever. Just make sure it's the right move.
Yeah, I guess with this analogy of the rabbits, you've got to differentiate between, having multiple different things that you enjoy and that are prioritized by you in some way, and actually considering the rabbit to be the sort of overall objective, that all of those things sit underneath, and anything that sits outside of those overall objectives is another rabbit that's distracting you.
Right. Yeah. And I guess the question you have to ask at some stage in your life is, when is it time to stop chasing rabbits? Right?
Yeah.
Like, because I used to love chasing rabbits. You couldn't pay me enough to do it. I've developed to love the predictability of my life. Right. I don't have to go anywhere. I don't have to report to anyone. I love sunrises. I love Mexico and Spain in the winter. I love Australia, and so those things became more important to me than my ego or vanity or recognition. None of that stuff means anything to me anymore. So it's like, that's kind of like an every 5-year thing, to take a few days away and go, if it was all come to an end in 5 years' time, would I be proud that I was doing this? Would it matter? Yeah,
that's a good heuristic, isn't it? Would I be proud of what I've done in the last 5 years if I die 5 years from now?
Right. Well, a very real example of that, this little town I grew up with, my little sister, I have three sisters. She's the youngest, and she married a farmer, a friend of mine, and grown up on the farm. Amazing family, 3 kids. Anyhow, 5 years ago, my brother-in-law, who had never smoked, never done drugs, healthiest guy, like just wonderful farmer, and he got cancer. And even after a transplant and everything else, we lost him about 6 weeks ago. And not long before he did, about 2 weeks, so I was going up there every other week to see them and spend time with them. And I'm sitting with him on the back porch one day, and his son is in a tractor in the field. His 2 daughters are in the house, and my sister's talking to my girlfriend in the kitchen. And the sun's going down. And I said, Jim, I said, I want to, I know where you're at with the cancer, and it was only a matter of time. And I said, I know I've offered this before, but I really want to take action. Like, what do you want to do before you go? Who do you want to see? What can I do for you? And he just looked down, and he looked out at the field, and he looked in the house, and he turned to me and he said, Sean, everything I have, everything I love is right here. Nothing he wanted or needed.
Well, that's what we're all looking for, right?
Right. Yeah, we don't all have to be chasing rabbits every day.
Yeah.
He found his rabbits and developed a nice backyard and a farm, and people came in to see him, and I just think that that's so beautiful. Like, it's not my life, but he knew his life, and he set it up and arranged around it and attracted people that loved him, and it's a beautiful thing.
The sort of parable of the Mexican fisherman.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know it? You probably tell it better than I will, but I'll tell it. I'll give it a crack. So there's a Mexican fisherman, spends his days out on the lake fishing for fish, as you do. His evenings are spent with his family, sat around the fire, cooking, eating together, enjoying each other's company. This tourist comes along, businessman, says, you know what you should do? If you paid some of your friends to come and fish with you, they could catch more fish, you could sell more fish at the market and make more money. And the fisherman says, well, why would I do that? And he says, well, if you're selling more fish, then you can invest in, some freezers and transportation business. You can start moving it out of your village and into the towns around. The fisherman says, well, why would I do that? And he says, well, once you've established a business in the towns, then you can build an export business. And once you're exporting your fish, you'll, grow the business, and eventually you'll have enough money so that you can retire and spend all of your time sat around the fire with your family, cooking, and eating together.
Yeah, exactly. Waste your life to do exactly what you're doing today to get what you want. Yeah. It's true. I think that's the American dream.
All right. Bad service is a team effort.
Yeah. I've been very lucky to have some great mentors in my life, and I'm working in London. My first opportunity to run a store in a restaurant in the East End, and I knew this wasn't a good day. Looking at the schedule and who came in, some people swapped shifts, and the theater district, and people got to get in and out really quickly. And I also had a boss, an area manager, who would just pop in. And I mean, this guy, I always felt like he had a camera. He always popped in at the wrong time. So sure enough, we're right before the theater is about to open. People need to get out, and it's a disaster. And he pops in. And like, he wasn't a guy to roll up his sleeves, but on this occasion he did. Like, it was that bad. And so he helps us out, get people out, handle a few complaints. And he says, let's sit down for a coffee. To me, that's like walking over the guillotine with this guy. So he said, what happened here today, Sean? And I started saying, well, this person switched with this person, this and that happened, whatever else. And he just put his hand up quietly, and he said, Sean, there's no such thing as like bad staff or bad scheduling. He said, only inept leadership. And he said, I'm open to the idea that it's my problem, that I've made a mistake here, and putting you in charge and not helping you understand the schedule and everything else. Is you should be open to the idea that this is your problem, this is your responsibility. But he said, let's not spend much time talking about the staff and the decisions they made, right? And that's always stayed with me. The woman in the restaurant today, the chef and this and that, that's the business, right? People allow this to go on. In my business is something I put in place, and I recommend to every bar and restaurant. It's the lowest cost, highest impact thing you're going to do to monitor and measure your hospitality output is to have a mystery shopper program in place. And I'm not even a big fan of the companies that do it. I imagine there's great ones out there. I just haven't found them yet. But we have a mechanism to just get some of your friends and neighbors and people to come in, a $50 bar spend, $100, $200, whatever it is. And if it's a third cost of goods, it's not very expensive. I always did it twice a week, and it'd be great coaching advice. But the idea, the old saying, trust an owl, but tie up your camel, right? Like, that's tying your camel up, saying that, hey, people are going to come in on a regular basis. And it's not that I don't trust you. It's I need to uphold a certain standard, and when it falls, I need to be able to coach you on it. Just like the reason I don't just dump the till into a bucket every night. It's not that I don't trust you, but there's a process to this. And if it's short, we got to work backwards to find out how to make it whole. And that's what that's about for me, is that, there's a system, and I find, like I said earlier, far too much of the blame goes on to the front end staff. They were not selected to represent your brand of hospitality properly. They are not prepared for the shift properly. Back to Hard Rock, I was made employee of the month or something the month prior, and I tell you, that as a young guy with my ego too, that was some steroids for me. But the following month I came in having failed at something I was doing outside of work, and he just came in pissed off and angry, and my manager couldn't bring me around. He sent me home. And I'm like, how do you send home one of your star players? And I threatened to quit, and the 19-year-old me was being 19. And he said, Sean, listen, I really value you, I appreciate you, but he said, like a Broadway show, he said, have you been to Broadway? And I said, yeah, several times. And he said, you ever seen a performer have a bad day? He said, you're allowed to have a bad day, just not on my bar. Right? And that's the way I feel about things. If someone's not ready for the shift, don't put them in front of people. Can they work it? Can they work somewhere else? Or do you have a deep enough bench to deal with that? And then, is a machine set up? Are you coaching them as they go? Are they focused on the right things? And does that leader on duty uphold a certain standard, even with his or her energy and the way they interact with guests? A great leader, a great system could not be over top of the hotel that I'm staying at. It's just impossible, unless everything fell apart today.
Yeah.
They seem far too comfortable in what they're doing for that to be the
definitely
case.
normalized that kind of service. Yeah. Right. One more, if you'll allow me.
Sure.
Pouring money into marketing when your venue is in decline is like pouring gasoline on a burning fire.
Yeah. When I start working with clients, it's like, hey, we're just about to start. We got this multimedia company, and they're going to help us with our socials, and we're going to do this and that. And the first thing I suggest is, I said, do you have any reporting on your business? We'll send someone in to have a look at it. And like I say, if you have a terrible product, and everyone just associates that with their food or drink. Let's say your food or drink's stellar, but the service is like what we've been talking about. It's terrible. I'm never coming back again. So get your offer right first, and then amplify it, right? Like, I look at it like that, like an amplifier. If you're a terrible guitar player, don't plug into the amp and blow everyone's ears out.
Yeah.
Right? Get your play right, practice, get your system in place, elevate your people, set new expectations, elevate them again, and so on and so forth. And then put some money, pour some gas on the fire, and let people know that you're ready for business. The only thing it does going in reverse, having a terrible product and amplifying, is just fast tracking the bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a good thing for some businesses, right? Why delay it? Let's let everyone see what happens. Because the way that I think about it, when I watch people walk through the front door of a bar or restaurant, think about it like a funnel, and they're all going in the top. And they're all going to come out the bottom with a sign that either says 0 through 6, 7 or 8, or 9 or 10. Everything short of the 9 or 10s are going around town and trashing you.
Yeah.
Right? So if you want to pour more people in faster, go ahead and do that. It just fast tracks your exit.
Yeah, just speeding up the inevitable.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Sean Finter, thanks so much.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Where can we find you?
So new website. So I sold Barmetrics after all those years. So that was my identity for 22 years. So just SeanFinter.com, SeanFinter.com. And then that's the best place.
No nonsense, easy to remember.
Yeah, same on social media. I think it's Finter Sean because my dyslexia. No, I think the other was taken or something. I don't know.
Thanks so much.
All
Appreciate
right.
it.
Pleasure, man. Thank you.